Everybody, welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show. This show is brought to you by TLBTV and the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and yes, I'm excited again about my guest. My guest today, Joshua Shea, is Shea, right?
Yes, it is.
Is someone that I am so eager to interview. He is from Maine. I think Maine is kind of quiet, isn't it?
It depends what part you're in. You can either get lobster or meth. It depends what you want.
He is a very interesting person to me, and I have an awful lot of respect for him because I have guests who shares their journey because they hope that it can help someone else. When you are a survivor of addictions, especially pornography, and you are willing to look the world in the eye and say, hey, this is an illness and we need to be supportive as a whole, that speaks volumes to me. My guest today, Joshua Shea, is from Maine. He is a person that is really into journalism. You are great with the words.
Thank you.
He is a great speaker. He's a coach. I would say he's also an expert in pornography as far as helping others get to a better place with that experience. He has a gift of words. Like I said, he wrote an amazing book called The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About: How I Let Pornography Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships. He is also a father of 2 children, and he has an amazing wife, Melissa. I have to give Melissa her props because she stuck behind him through thick and thin. And I believe he was his first real love in life. So I have to give her props because some people just don't have it like that, have that kind of heart. And for you to be blessed to have that in your life, I'm just really impressed with God. I just have to say that. I'm looking forward to talking to him because I want people to understand that addiction is an illness. He wrote an amazing book while he was in jail because he got arrested because he had pornography that was considered underage pornography. But I also want him to explain to people that it's not exactly as it appears, but yet the crime was committed. But I feel like everybody should hear both sides. And so that's what I'm looking forward to. I want you to let people know it's just not by chance that this occurred. Right. For you to pick up your bed and walk is just phenomenal to me because that is not anything anybody would want the whole world to know about. But because some kind of way your heart opened for humanity, you are sharing your journey. How you doing today, Joshua?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I really appreciate the time to share my story.
It is unbelievable. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I don't want to just go straight into the book.
Yeah.
Because it's a journey to that book. I want people to understand how you ended up with this book because you bared your soul. You know, it was very intimate for you to not actually be an intimate person. You were able to break down addiction in a way that I just was in awe because it gave me a new compassion for people who's addicted to anything. Yours just happened to be pornography, you know, and it wasn't even just pornography, but what I want people to see is the little boy.
Okay.
That's sitting in this chair today. Okay, I want you to tell me, what was your first memory as a child?
My first memory of a child, and I have no idea if it's just a coincidence that it was on my brother's day of birth. I was 2.5 years old. There was a restaurant in my town that was shaped like a train, and my parents never wanted to go there because they said the food was horrible. It's kind of like a diner, and my uncle brought me there, and he stopped. I remember him stopping and having me pose to take a picture. And I remember, and this, I can remember just thinking right now, back to my head, putting my little hand up on the little railing of the train car, and that picture being taken. And I've seen that picture 10,000 times, and it always takes me back to that time. And I remember what inside the place looks like. And I only found out years later that that day was the day my brother was born. So I really don't think it has anything to do with that. But it was the day my brother was born, getting to eat at this restaurant shaped like a train, because, like, you know, a lot of little kids, I was absolutely in love with trains, had a model train set, you know, all that. So yeah, that's probably my earliest memory that's clear.
So basically, it was just you and your brother. You didn't have any other siblings?
Nope, just my younger brother. He was about 2.5 years younger than me.
So what was your most happiest moment as a child?
Oh, you know, I'm not sure. I think it would probably be overall just being on the vacations with my family in the summer. My parents were both school teachers, so come June 15th or 20th, they were done with work for 2.5 months. I was done with school for 2.5 months, and they love to travel and they love to see America. So it was just kind of like, okay, well, you're done with school for the day. Get yourself a drink, go to the bathroom, get in the camper. We're going. And for 5-6 years of my life, we spent most of my summers just traveling the country. I've seen just about everything in the U.S. And just being on those trips, no specific incident, just being on those trips was really a lot of fun.
Oh, so would you say you were happy?
I think so. I look back and, with the exception of that, caregiver that I'm sure we'll get into, I think I was happy. I really liked being with my family. My parents, they had, very dysfunctional upbringings, and I think that they really went over the top to make sure that my brother and I had a very loving, supportive family. Maybe to a fault, where there was sometimes too much support or too much adulation where it didn't need to be. But no, I was raised by two great people, and if I can be half the parents that they were, my kids are going to be okay.
So how do you think, like, the babysitter in your life, how do you think that was missed with your parents, that something was amiss there?
I actually think that it also has to do with them being school teachers and seeing so many kids who are troubled, and were far more troubled than I ever was. I mean, I was at this babysitter while they were at work prior to me being old enough for elementary school, and then I went there after school for 2 or 3 years until I stopped going there. As far as missing it, I think that I was just scared to say anything. I know I was scared to say anything after one event that I actually put into my book. And I think that I was starting to form my behaviors, which include deception, which included manipulation. It was just better for me to put that behind me and not talk about it. And once my parents got there, my parents, now that they know a little bit about what happened, they look back and say, geez, you really did run and jump in our arms. And when we got there, and we just thought you were happy to see us. And, we'd come and get you, you'd be outside, but you never told us you were outside, ignored by her for 5 hours. And those were the kinds of things that, it was just better to pretend it wasn't happening and just go home with my parents and enjoy what was there. That was why they never caught on, and I don't blame them. I don't hold them responsible, anything like that.
My point is, a lot of people don't understand, it's something about when you're a child and you experience abuse, for some reason you don't talk about it.
Well, I didn't want my parents to get mad. The devil I knew was there. I don't know what the devil would have been had I gone someplace else. And the fact was, there was one point where I brought up a incident to my mom where my mom asked her if I could watch a TV show. Wasn't actually allowed to watch it, whether she forgot or did it intentionally, I don't know. I mentioned it to my mother that day. My mother mentioned it to her the next day, and she played very apologetic to my mother. Once my mother was gone, she was just, demon lady. And I learned very fast, don't mention stuff to my mother, because if I mention stuff to my mother will bring it up to her. She will then put an act on for my mother, and once my mother's out the door, I bear the brunt of it. So why bring it up to my mother, since it's going to fall on my shoulders anyway?
Wow. And during that time, she was a compulsive behavior person.
She was a mess. She was a mess. Looking back, I see that now, and I feel bad for her having these issues. And she had a very rough upbringing too. No excuse, but I can look back and understand with some level of a distance why she was the way she was. She shouldn't have been allowed to take care of children, but she did. Not every time was, every moment is absolutely horrible from what happened there, but it was not an environment that was healthy for a child to be raised in.
But I mean, some of the impact that it had on you developing as a child, for instance, how you looked at sex during that time was affected by her. Explain to us how that affected your perception of sex.
Well, you have to keep in mind, for my waking hours at least, I was there half the time and I was with my parents half the time. Granted, I slept at home, but I interacted with this caregiver and her family and the other children who were being taken care of half the time, and with my family half the time. My mother and father, both French, Irish Catholics, and as far as conservative with sex goes, I think that it's just this much to the side of Muslim. I mean, they are very, very, very conservative. If, a woman in a bikini came on television, we'd have to change the channel. I can watch Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and see a million guys get killed, but skin was sin. So we didn't do that. However, at the babysitter's house, she would have HBO on. She would have movies that had nudity on. They walked around with a certain level of freedom with their bodies. And it was odd because I felt like I was getting very conflicting messages. At my house with my family, I felt safe. I felt loved. It was good there, yet sex was a very bad thing. And then you flip it over to the babysitter's house. And she, gave me an environment where I didn't feel safe, where I didn't feel nurtured, but sex was more open, and the openness seemed more natural. I tend to like it a little bit more. It was one of those things where I liked seeing, a woman's butt on HBO in a movie, even if I was 5 years old. Maybe because my mom didn't want me to see it, I don't know. But I get this message that sex is a good thing, but I'm getting it in this absolute house of horrors that I'm spending half my time in. So that was really, I think, where I formed such a warped view of sexuality, is because I had these two messages that were just in direct opposition.
Yeah.
And as a 4 or 5 year old kid, you try to navigate it and you try to figure it out, but that's when you're really forming your mechanisms. That's when you're really forming your attitudes and forming the way you look at things. And so I was taught sex is a thing to be hidden. It's good, but it's a thing to be hidden. And that's such a mixed message. You're not going to end up healthy when you're growing up with that message.
And she had compulsive behavior. Share with us some of the ways.
They were wild. Every floor in her house was carpeted, every single one, and she vacuumed it probably 8 to 10 times a day. And she had one of those, tube vacuums with a long hose, and I had to follow behind her every time she did it and pick up every little piece of lint off the floor. She would take a hard plastic comb to my hair probably 15 to 20 times a day, just hard as she can do it, combing it straight out. And perhaps one of the more strange ones was that she liked to call me George. And she just called me George all the time. And I remember, why do you call me George? Because I like that name better. And it's okay, you know what? I'm not going to cause any flack here. George it is. I'll be George between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's fine. And there were a million other little things like that,
Like following you to the restroom, watching you use the restroom.
Yes, she would follow the boys to the restroom and make sure that if we were going number one, that we would sit and we would tuck in, and then she would tell us just how bad the human male anatomy was. That was a bad thing. It's too bad that we didn't all have what girls had, because I don't think it was that she was necessarily anti penis and pro vagina. I think it's that boys peed on the seat, and that was an OCD for her. So she felt we had to sit there tucked in, and she had to watch us to make sure nothing got out of place, because her, I was there 7, 8 years, never sat on her couch, never sat on her recliner. I was always on the floor. You know, she was very, very, very particular. And the particularness sometimes moved a little bit. So you would get in trouble for something that was a rule one day, but not a rule the next day. And usually it was either go outside and you were outside the rest of the day till your parents picked you up at that point, or if it was winter or early in the day, you'd go into a dark room, and that would be, you know, to go take a nap, cool down. That could be 20 minutes, that could be 3 hours. And, you know, pitch black room. I'm not afraid of the dark, at least. But it was it was just, I look back, and up until the time right before my addiction reached the critical mass point, that was the most scared, the most fearful, the most stressed I ever was in my life, hands down.
Well, one more thing before we leave that, she also had you touch a little girl.
There was quite a handful of sexual inappropriate things that happened there, and I think I only mentioned 1 or 2 in the book. I do recall at one point, and most of the things that I remember, I recall seeing done to other kids or other kids doing them. I do recall at one point when I was probably 4, maybe 5, being brought into the room where she changed the small children, babies or small children, and there was a girl who was about 1 year old, and she wanted to show me the difference between male and female genitalia, and she told me to touch it and said I had to touch it. I didn't want to, but I knew that I would get in trouble, so touch it, get it over with, and be done with it. And you know, that was one of those things where I kind of just locked that up and threw away the key. And it wasn't until I got into some therapy that I started to unravel this stuff. And at this point, I've unearthed about 15, 16 incidents like this. And my therapist has just said, you know what happened there. You don't have to keep going deeper. You know what happened there. You can't change it. You've coped with it.
It was the building.
What is number 17 going to do for you?
Yeah. Okay, so when did porno actually come into your life?
Well, as I mentioned, you know, they didn't have any hardcore porn there. The first time I ever saw hardcore porn, I was 11 or 12 years old. It was summertime, and my uncle would rent a house at the beach every year. And one year, my family went down to visit, and my cousin said, hey, come upstairs. And he was a year or 2 older than me. And he pulled a cardboard box out from under the bed he was using, and out he pulled 3 hardcore pornography magazines, something like a Hustler or Penthouse. And I'd never seen pictures like that before. And I'll tell you, I was addicted probably 10 seconds in. And it's the exact same way I felt with alcohol. As you know, I have dealt with alcoholism. It was the same feeling I had the first time I ever got drunk, and real drunk a few years later. I felt like when I looked at this pornography that I had just found some kind of magical substance, some kind of coping mechanism that was going to help me through the hard times, that it was sex, so it was good, and it was a little bit dangerous because the family was downstairs, and oh my gosh, look at what these people are doing. I had some idea, but not this graphically. This is amazing. I want to see more of this stuff. This makes me feel good. This makes me forget everything else that's going on. And I mean, 3 minutes, I'm 11 or 12 years old. I don't know what, huge anxieties I had going, but I just recognized this is going to be a coping mechanism for me moving forward. This is good. I probably didn't see hardcore pornography for 2 years after that, but boy, did that stick with me. That was one of those things where when I turn 18 years old, I'm going to start buying this stuff. I'm going to start getting this stuff. And well, thankfully for me at the time, when I was 14, I found a video store that would rent it to me. I found another little corner store that would sell me magazines. So 14 years old onward, I had an unending supply of pornography.
But you also said it was the surrogate to actually having a real woman. And I thought that was pretty profound.
Yeah, for me at that point it was. I mean, I was a very smart kid, but I was also one of these guys who just didn't mesh socially. Everybody knew who I was because I was a very loud, outspoken kind of person, but I don't feel like I had that junior high school or high school experience that so many of them just had, where I was the black sheep. I was a square peg and they were round holes. I couldn't quite make a friendship group. I couldn't quite mesh with them. And while I had friends with girlfriends and I knew what was going on with them, and I even had one or two along the way, why do I have to deal with some 17-year-old girl's problems when I can just go rent another video? I don't have to listen to them complain. I don't have to, hang out with their friends who I don't like anyway, hoping that I get a kiss or a little bit more. I can just go to the video store and you know what? That day I want two blonde girls, so I'll find that movie. Or the next day I want cheerleaders, so I'll find that movie. But porn never says no. Porn never talks back. Porn never asks anything of you. It's a great escape and it's a surrogate because let's be honest, for most people who aren't addicts, porn is a surrogate for sex because masturbation and porn go hand in hand. It ends the same way. That's why it serves as such a surrogate. There's, your 5 seconds of pleasure if you're a guy right at the very end. That's the surrogacy.
But there's so much going on inside of you that has yet to be revealed as you're growing up. Right.
And that's it. And that's the thing is that I'll put it this way. I recognize that I looked at porn differently than my friends. We might get together and one of my friends, if we're 16 or 17, might have a tape and they'll put it in the VCR and they'll start cracking jokes and making fun. And it's and I'm thinking to myself, why are we sitting around four guys watching porn? Shouldn't we all be by ourselves? And this is why are you fast forwarding through the talking scenes? You have to enjoy the whole film. And it was very clear that much like with my alcohol in my 20s, it was very clear I used differently than the people around me early on. I wasn't doing this recreationally. There was something medicinal to it. If there was a bad day at school or a bad day at work, I always knew I had this escape there at the end of the day. And when I turned about 20 years old, that was in 1996. That was right around the time the internet started popping up. So 19, 20 years old, I get on the internet. It takes me all of about 5 minutes to figure out how to get pornography on it. And I don't think I've looked at a video or magazine since because now it's at the click of a button. And that's the society we live in.
And eventually, like I said, you are good at journalism. You start your own magazine in your town. And that's when things really start to escalate, that there was really a lot of issues with you.
Well, absolutely. And, I worked my way through the journalism ranks in Maine and in northern New England for 10, 12 years. And I was working as a editor publisher for a weekly newspaper about 20 miles outside my hometown. And when the economy took a downturn in 2008, I realized we needed to have some other products aside from just the newspaper, which took a big hit. So I'd always had the idea of this magazine in my head, and I figured, I've got the resources, I've got the time. If I'm ever going to do this, now is the time. So we went ahead and tried it. I pulled a small staff together, and it exploded. And it was better than anything we'd ever had. But what happened was I started working 20-hour days, and I started really living off of the idea that people loved me. And my narcissist buttons absolutely got pushed. And they got pushed to the point where about a year and a half after starting the magazine, I decided we needed to have some kind of event where the magazine was the centerpiece as top sponsor, but would be a big event. We created a film festival. That film festival over the next 3-4 years grew into just about the largest film festival in Maine, one of the biggest ones in northern New England. And we were attracting people, like Patrick Dempsey to come to be at this festival. It was a major deal. Well, that wasn't enough for me either. I actually ran for city council and won. So I've got essentially 3 full-time jobs, not to mention that I'm a father and that I'm a husband. And I'm just trying to balance all this. And for a while I did. My alcoholism started to creep up. My porn use started to be every day after everybody went to bed, after the awards ceremonies were done or the networking functions or whatever I was at, glad handing people. I'd come home at night and everybody's in bed and it's 1 a.m. And well, I had just me to sit with. And just me was not the magazine guy. Just me was not the city councilor or the film festival guy, or however anybody else in the public liked me or defined me. It was just me by myself, and I didn't like who I was. I never had liked who I was up to that point. So I'd escape to the fantasy of pornography. Well, things at the magazine got worse. And, I was able to hide for many years that I was a bad businessman. When you've got a lot of money coming in, you can hide your faults. Well, when your expenses start to outpace your revenue, you have to start making some decisions. And I wasn't very good at making those decisions. Perhaps the most fateful thing that I did was I made the decision to pull myself off of medication that I'd been taking for about 10 years for bipolar disorder. In my 20s, I was diagnosed with first an anxiety disorder and then bipolar, and I took my medicine religiously. But I remembered back being 20, 21, 22 when I first started out, just full of energy, and I could be up 21, 22 hours a day. And I was creative as anything. And if I was going to save the magazine, which had started to crumble, which looked like it probably only had 6-8 months left in it if I didn't figure out how to save this thing, I didn't know how to do that. So that I said, well, I'll pull myself off of my pills. And that was the dumbest thing that I have ever done. I think that was the switch for the beginning of the beginning of the end, because instead of tapping into a manic side, there was just this other thing. I don't know if it was mania. I don't know if it was depression. I think it was rapid cycling. I don't know, because I had no medicine in me. But basically, my alcoholism expanded, fivefold, and my pornography use expanded fivefold. I was using them as the medicine. And that's, and as any addict will tell you, take, alcohol, for instance, you start with beer, you then move on to wine, you move on to shots. Or if you're a gambling addict, first you're betting $100 on a hand of blackjack, then 1,000, and then your kids aren't going to school and you've lost your house. You have to escalate things as an addict. And I went from, the computer screen clips to actually going into chat rooms and engaging women in there. And I made the horrible, stupid mistake of, just talking to whoever came up. And on March 20th, 2014, the Maine State Police showed up at my door. And after a conversation of about an hour, it was determined that one of these women who I spoke with and who I urged to, get sexual with herself on the camera for me, it turned out that she was 14 years old. And my life as I knew it was over right there, but that was probably the best moment of my life, and at the same time as being the worst moment of my life.
But the thing about that is, it's like, to the world, it doesn't matter how it came about. It's almost like they felt like that was your whole pornography journey, whereas it was just such a small portion.
It was probably, honestly, 6 months or so, and it wasn't every day. It might not have been 6 months, might have been 4. I would at night just get on to one of these camera to camera sites to talk to somebody. And if what I liked to do was, and I didn't, what's even a little bit not necessarily stranger to people on the outside, is that I wasn't using these for sexual pleasure. I was using them to display control. What I liked to do was get the woman to do what I wanted. And I didn't want a woman who I'd flick the button and there she was, and then, ooh, here I am. That was not my game. My game was to find somebody who would never do that in a million years, and then slowly break it down. I would learn a little bit about them, and as I'm talking to them on one side of my screen, right now I could be talking to you, and on the other side of my screen, you have no idea what I'm doing. I would figure out who they are. I'd get into their Facebook pages. I could figure out who they lived with. I could figure out all kinds of stuff, and then just break that into the conversation. Let's say I'm talking to you right here, and then I go on your Facebook page, and oh my gosh, you're competitive show jumping with horses for the last 20 years. Well, okay, I know that now. And then we're going to sit here and talk, and then in a few minutes, I work in something about competitive horse jumping that you light up, because I mentioned something that you love seemingly out of the blue, but the whole time I'm just doing research, I'm learning, and I'm grooming. I mean, this is the To Catch a Predator meets Catfish when you're looking at your exploitive TV shows. What I was doing to get to there, and I know that there was that one that was underage, but the fact was, it's not cool that I did this to a bunch of 22-year-olds or 32-year-olds or 42-year-olds either. I manipulated these women to do things that they wouldn't want to do. And if it was an especially difficult manipulation, at the very end, I would go and I'd do the little shift F4 and take a screen capture, or even at the very end, I learned how to take a little movie of what they did, not for pleasure, because I know how the internet works. I can find plenty of naked pictures. I took those pictures as a trophy. I mean, that's really what it was. It was a trophy to the fact that I had control. It was a trophy to the fact that I could still accomplish things. Those, little clips or little photos, they were as good as all the plaques on the wall in my office. They showed that I could achieve something, because that's all my life had been about, was trophy collecting and achieving. And I look back now, and it's sick to think I was able to get there, and I know that in the thick of it, when it was really bad, I didn't have full control over my faculties, but I don't use that as an excuse for where things went, because I'm the one who knew I had mental health issues, and I'm the one who pulled myself off of those pills. I think that definitely contributed to where I got to. And that's part of the reason why I ended up writing my book, was to show people that, yeah, I was a porn addict for 20 years. I was in that very critical phase for only a few months at the end, but it only took a few months for my good sense to completely disappear. And thank God the police showed up when they did, because if they hadn't, between the alcoholism, the porn, and just the poor way that I was taking care of myself physically, I don't know if I'd be here talking with you today. I couldn't have kept on with that. Something was going to get me. I knew in the back of my head something was going to get me. Perhaps statistically I should have drove the car into a house. I was driving drunk so much at the time. But the porn was what got me. Thank God something got me in time, and thank God those police showed up at my door. And while I knew my life was over that moment, or my life that I knew it, I got to tell you now, 4.5 years later, my life is in a much better place, and I don't regret them showing up.
No other way to do it. But like when you was talking about, these contributing factors, you had PTSD.
Didn't know it at the time, but yes.
Right, that's what I'm saying. These are contributing factors.
Yep.
Workaholic, alcoholic, pornographic addict, bipolar, anxiety on anxiety medication, detachment disorder,
Quite a buffet, huh?
Phobia. I mean, you had so compulsive behavior. I mean, when you put all that together.
And I was only sleeping about 2 hours a night.
Right. And then you was like drinking like 10 cups of coffee.
Oh yeah, on a slow day.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night,
off your meds with bipolar. When you come off your meds with bipolar, you saw that as a way to become dynamic, because you become like invincible. You thought that was going to save your magazine. And so in the midst of trying to save your magazine, everything just collided.
Oh yeah, I've had more than one person say you had the absolute perfect storm of events happen to you, and I did. But like I said, I try not to minimize. I try not to rationalize. This was my doing. The punishment that I was given by a judge was deserved. You can't do what I did and get away with it. You shouldn't do what I did and get away with it. And I'm just hoping to be able to be out there, let the porn addicts know where this can lead to. If I can get there, you can get there. And don't get there because not only was that 14-year-old girl a victim on the other end, there were the other women as well, but there was also my wife, my kids, my parents, and to tell the truth, the community. I still have some trouble being out in my community because I don't even think it's really about the crime. I think it's about the betrayal. They saw one person for so many years who was a pillar of his community, and then in one fell swoop that was all erased with these allegations, and turned out, hey, you lied to us. And I think a lot of them still hold on to that, today.
Yeah, just like, who are you?
Yeah, exactly. And they don't know who I am today. And it's only through a lot of work I've come to realize they didn't know who I was back then either. I was playing a character for them.
And you did it very well. Like you were saying about authority, you learned that from authoritative figures in your life. Like that babysitter, she taught you how to be authoritative and how to manipulate. Yeah. Like I say, those was forming years in your beingness,
Well, look at it this way. I ran this newspaper that then begat this magazine, which begat this film festival. I was living my own reality because I was the boss. I set up the companies. I hired the people. I set the hours. I decided what's on the cover of the magazine. That was control. I had massive control issues, and I chose work situations where I was in control. It was almost like my own little fantasy land. And then when I had to come back down to earth, well, if nobody was around late at night, well, I can escape back to another fantasy land with the pornography.
And so you decided to write your book because?
Well, I've been tossing around the idea. You got to remember that I was arrested in March of 2014. The legal system works very slowly. About a week and a half, 2 weeks after I was arrested first, I went to rehab in California for alcoholism. At this point, I had not accepted that I was a porn addict. I thought that my behavior was just because I was drunk in the middle of the night. And I don't know that I even was really positive porn addiction was a real thing. So I went to rehab in California. Thankfully, shortly after being there, my wife was able to hook me up with a sex therapist on the outside. And while I was on campus with the alcohol, I was off campus with the pornography, and he helped me tap into some of those memories of the babysitter. He helped me to understand how these coping mechanisms and survival skills were formed. So when I left after 10 weeks of rehab in California, I came back home, got myself into deep therapy several times a week, several hours a session, and started to work on this part of things. After about another 6-7 months, I said, the alcohol rehab was so transformative. I've got to do this for the pornography. I can't just be doing this 2 hours and reading the rest of the time about it. I need to be enmeshed. So I went off to Texas to a rehab there in 2015, came back and did more therapy. So I was changing this entire time. I was getting healthy this entire time. I was learning about who I was, how I formed into the person I was, and I was learning about pornography addiction in general because I was just researching anything I could find about it. There were 1,000,001 studies that have come out in the last year, but back in 2015, it was still the Stone Ages when it comes to this. So the person who went to jail in January of 2016 was ironically the healthiest version of myself that I'd ever been to that point because I'd had 2 years since my arrest. So I'm sitting in the pod that I'm in. It's about 12, 13 guys in a not very large room, but room to walk around. And after several weeks, because I was very well known, when I was sentenced and when I went to jail, it was covered by the media. So they got the newspaper in jail. So when I walked into the room, they all knew who I was because there was this big story about me going into jail that day. Within the next few weeks, several of the men talked to me about pornography or about their sex life. And despite the fact they were almost all there for either drug violations or domestic abuse issues, so many of them had sex issues. So many of them had pornography issues. And they were actually more embarrassed by those. They were more ashamed of those. They didn't like the fact that they were a heroin addict, but they didn't want to talk about the fact that, they'd had 700 sex partners and they were only 22 years old and could never find one that they actually could finish with. That was embarrassing to them, not the heroin. Same thing with, a guy could slap around his girlfriend, but he was more embarrassed that he couldn't satisfy her or that they needed pornography playing in the background. That's what embarrassed these guys. That's what got to the core of these guys. And I realized that, this needs to get out there that we need to start talking about this. There's clearly a problem here. I knew some of the statistics and where they were starting to head, but I said, I'm going to write a story here about what happened to me. I'm not going to make this self-help per se, although I know a lot of people have been helped with it. I'm not going to fill this full of statistics to make it like a textbook and dull and boring. All I'm going to do is I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to tell my story basically from when the magazine started to the day I was arrested, and then I'll do backflashes and I'll tell people what happened to me afterwards. But I'm going to write this so people can just read some guy's story. It's not, you've read it. It's not a science text. It's nothing hard. It's basically, it could be a fiction book just as easily. It's just one guy's story of how he ended up where he ended up. And how he pulled himself, not necessarily how he pulled himself out of it, but that he did pull himself out of it, and it's possible.
Wow, and you definitely did that. And it's a memoir, like you said, but you have said some very informative things. Like one of the things you said was addictions, you have rituals. They have some structure and sense to them for the person that's addicted.
Absolutely. And that's for every addiction. Just think about your morning routine. Maybe you're addicted to caffeine. You know, I bet that you pick the same cup every day. I bet that you brew exactly the same way. You have rituals to things that make you happy. In the early days of pornography, I mean, that modem sound, that of the dial-up modem, that was like a siren song to me. That was, I would always move over to wherever if I was using a laptop, I'd move over to my couch in my living room, and I would start on this one site and then move to a different site and then move to this third site, and I only use these 3 sites. There are rituals to everything, and that's how you can tell that things are becoming a habit. And if you're not too careful, they move from the habit stage to the addiction stage.
Well, just like you also said, like talking to other people, that is also was an escape from a harsh world. Like so many people that's addicted to anything, they look at the world like it's just cold.
Yeah, and it lets you stop thinking about it. I mean, that's the thing. If I was in a group of people, if I'm generally a shyish person around groups of people, but if I knew I was going to be around a group of people, I would have 2 beers at the office before I got there. Then I'd get to the place, and there's always a bar. I would hit some of the hard stuff immediately, and suddenly I've got this little energizer bunny in me who's ready to talk to everybody and shake hands. And it's not me, it's a fantasy version of me that's brought on by alcohol. Same thing with the pornography. I could go to bed and lay there and think about all the things I have to worry about. Oh my gosh, are my bills going to be paid? How's things going at work? Am I being a good father, a good husband? What's all these little things? No, I'll just stay there and I'll watch pornography because I don't think of those little things. I don't think of any of those things. It just numbs my mind. And it's not even like a giant, great trip to, Willy Wonka's sexual kingdom. It's just that it numbs my brain and I blank. And that's just as good as anything else. If it's numbing, that's what I need. I don't need it to raise my consciousness. I just need it to numb me out. And that's what alcohol and porn both did for so many years.
Well, like you said in the book, you said you make a conscious physical choice, but eventually the subconscious takes over, and that's when it becomes dangerous.
Yeah, that's when you really hit that critical point of addiction where you can see what it's doing, but you can't stop yourself. And there starts to be, you always know there's the possibility of getting caught. There's the possibility of there being ramifications. But, I got to the point where I wasn't working on the magazine anymore at night. I'd play slot machine games on Facebook. And then once everybody went to bed, I'd turn to the porn. And in the morning, when I would usually stay at home for the first 3-4 hours of the day because I didn't want to go to work because I just looked so bad, I stopped working on the magazine and I started either looking at porn or taking a nap or watching TV, just ignoring what I really should have been working on. And that's part of the addiction as well. You're not up to it when it comes to your activities like school or work or family life. And it didn't necessarily, in my case, immediately, but it does lead to financial issues. I lost my job. It was challenging. Obviously, it can lead to legal issues. There are very few true hardcore addicts that don't end up in trouble with the law one way or another. Even if it's just somebody drunk driving and spending a night in jail or losing their license for 30 days, almost everybody who has a real hardcore addiction ends up talking to the law at one point or another.
Well, do you think it's kind of difficult to really get through to people that it's an illness?
Yes, I do, for a couple reasons. One, I don't think people want to admit it's an illness if they have it. I think that you like to believe that you're healthy. When it comes to the families and friends of addicts, I don't think that there's been enough out there education-wise for them to understand that it's an addiction, that they can just think that, a wife might think she's the problem. She's the reason why her husband's looking at porn. A bunch of friends may be like, oh, he's just a pervert, whatever, and not think of it seriously. But one of the greatest things in the history of porn addiction study happened just about a month ago, and that was when the World Health Organization finally labeled sexual compulsive disorder as a diagnosable and treatable condition. Now, that's not pushing as far as saying sex addiction and porn addiction, but But that's as close as we've got to this point. And that can be extrapolated from that. When I went to rehab, in order for my insurance to cover it, they had to say I had chronic impulse disorder. Because that way insurance would cover it. And that's what's really important. That's what's really a stumbling block here to a lot of people getting help, is that right up until the World Health Organization said this, everything was pretty much out of pocket for people unless you could be diagnosed with something else. Unfortunately, in America, most psychologists and therapists use the DSM. And that's not the same book that's created by the World Health Organization. That's the ICC. They're basically both just manuals of diagnostic conditions. So we still have a ways to go. It'll probably be 6 or 7 years before the DSM includes sex and porn addiction. And it'll probably be another 6 or 7 years beyond that when insurance companies begin covering it. But you have to start somewhere, and the World Health Organization saying that it is actually a diagnosable condition is a huge step forward.
Well, when you use that word compulsive, I'm reminded when you were, I don't know if you were a teenager or a young age, where you collected over 150,000.
250,000, but who's counting?
Baseball cards.
Yeah. I was the little kid, and you could see this in my work, and you could see this in any activity I did. If I committed myself to something, I was in it 100%. When Zelda came out on Super Nintendo, I was there the day it came out. I purchased it, and I beat it that first day so I could go to school and tell everybody what happens on that final screen, because I didn't want anybody else to ruin it for me, but I wanted to ruin it for all of them. When I decided I wanted baseball cards, I wanted to have more than anybody I knew, and there was one kid I knew who had almost 200,000, so I did what I needed to do, and I got 250,000. There are times in my life when senior year of high school, I opted to cover the state tennis championships as a writer for the sports department at the newspaper than go to my prom, because far more people were going to see my name in the newspaper. I was going to hear from people. It was going to be a much bigger deal if I cover the state tennis championships and the high school, the local high school wins, which they did. And I was there that night at the office, and a couple of guys were like, "Hey, isn't it Lewiston High School's prom tonight?" It's like, "Yeah, but I want to cover the tennis thing. Who cares about the prom? It's just another dance." I was very easily obsessed with things. And even now today, I have to watch myself. When it comes to everything, if I enjoy one video game, I have to actually find 5 or 6 and split my time among them so I don't focus on one. I have to make sure that I don't do any one thing too much. And thankfully, with all the cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm very good at catching myself doing things or asking myself why I'm doing things these days.
So this is, like I was saying, all these are contributing factors to lead to some kind of addiction.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, addiction is a stew, and it's never going to be the same stew for two people. But there are a lot of the same characteristics. For instance, with porn addiction and sex addiction, over 90% of the addicts have had some kind of trauma early in their life. 9 out of 10. So while everybody's story is a little different, that's somewhat the same there. And you can find that through other addictions as well, that there, while we all have different stories, we all do have certain commonalities.
So where do you think PTSD come in at with you?
I believe that, or I subscribe to the theories that I developed PTSD based on that babysitter's home. That I blocked that place for a long time. When my mother told me when I was 20, 21 years old that she died, I was very happy. I can't tell you why. I couldn't tell you why. I just knew that I was happy. And my parents told me that they knew I didn't like the place, but they never could quite put their finger on it. I had trouble dealing when I was starting to come up with some of these memories of what happened there. It was really tough to go through. And I mean, I would be wrecked. I tried to actually have therapist sessions at the end of the day, because if I had one at 9 a.m. and we made some kind of breakthrough or discovery, the PTSD hit and I was just wrecked. And I think that understanding how I felt when stress hit, when I had to survive, when I was put into a corner, when I was in a fight or flight situation, PTSD kicked in. throughout my life, and I can spot that now. And that's, my entire mantra was survive to the next day, because that's what I thought when I was a 4 and 5-year-old kid at that babysitter's house. And that's what I thought when I was 37 years old running my magazine, is that, okay, you know what? They didn't turn the lights off. Everybody's still here. We'll survive to the next day. Just keep going. Just survive to the next day. And I reached such a critical point with my health at the very end before I was arrested that it really was a matter of almost physically just surviving to the next day. And when there were times that I was put into a corner, whether it was, the printer telling me that I had to come up with $15,000 I didn't have in 48 hours, or it was, my wife wanted to talk to me about what was going on around me. When these stressful kind of things happened, I just regressed, and I just, I need to put this all away, and I need to, this is winding me up. I mean, we're talking about it's even winding me up a little. This is PTSD. It's one of those things where it's just kind of like, a parrot on your shoulder, that when things get tough, it just starts pecking away at you. And thankfully, like I said, now I can recognize that. Now I know if I'm having a really bad day, not to try to fix it that day, because that day's gone. And that's still, a couple months ago, I went through a little bit of a rough patch, and once again, I said, no, okay, well, I got till 2:00 today, and now I am bitter and perturbed and angry, and whatever's happening, depressed, whatever's happened to me that day. Okay, it's time to shut it down. It's just time to shut it down. And with the bipolar, which I still have, you still get those ups and downs. That's still a part of my life I deal with today.
And you're doing a great job with it.
Well, today I am, and and I'm on my meds. I take the meds as prescribed.
And it do make a difference with the
absolutely.
bipolar.
100%.
You can't even play with the medication when it comes to bipolar.
Oh, no, not at all. And that's the thing, is that a lot of bipolar people along their way, they will all stop their medicine one time or another. It's just this weird thing that we have where, I take my medicine for 4 or 5 years. I feel pretty normal. Well, I feel as normal as you seem, so I can take myself off the pills. They fixed me. And you tend to think of bipolar almost like a broken arm, or it's something that heals. Well, it doesn't heal. It's a lifelong condition that needs to be dealt with. And that's one of those things that, still has to stay at the front of my mind. I'm never going to pull myself off my pills, but I have to remind myself, even if a little voice comes in and says, maybe you could get by without these. No, that voice gets shut down.
So if you wanted to tell people right now what's most important to you in that book, what would it be?
Most important to me in the book would probably be the 2 reasons I wrote it. Number one is I wanted to tell my story to show there is no stereotypical porn addict. When I went to rehab for porn addiction, I met men and women. I met young and old, rich, poor, white, black, Mexican, Asian, dumb as a stump, smart as Einstein. There is no typical porn addict. So if you're thinking that, the average porn addict is some 19-year-old guy in his mom's basement who's never kissed a girl in real life, well, that may be a porn addict, but that's not the only porn addict. So there is no stereotypical porn addict. It's important people know that. It can be anybody. And then number 2 was writing it kind of for those guys who shared that room with me in jail, and all the guys out there who are dealing with porn addiction. As I said, I wanted to show where it could lead. Even when I was addicted, when I was an ongoing addict, I wouldn't go to those chat rooms, because that to me is like cheating on my wife. But for that last little moment, I ended up going there. I ended up crossing that line, and thank God the police stopped me before it escalated to wherever it may go after that. I think maybe I would have jumped off the computer, or who knows? I have no idea what would have happened. But that escalation is what happens when a addiction reaches a critical point. And if that can happen for me, white collar professional, local celebrity, local politician, father, husband, if that can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. So if you think you have a porn addiction, please get some help. Sit down and talk to a therapist. Go sit at a meeting of Sex Addicts Anonymous. Go online and find a forum and share your story anonymously, and you'll find a lot of people in the same boat with you. You can't suffer with this alone. You can't fix this by yourself. You're an addict, and you need to get some help, and get some help before you reach where I did. That's what I hope that really comes out of this book, is that people get the help they need. And the ancillary part of it is we create less victims the more help we all get.
Well said. If people wanted to purchase your book or get in touch with you, because you do offer help to other people, how would they reach you and get your book?
Well, I think that whatever you want from me, whether it be getting my book or you want me to work as a peer counselor with you, or you just want to read my journey of recovery, or get resources to learn other places to learn about addiction, visit my website, which is recoveringpornaddict.com. That's recoveringpornaddict.com. That's everything that I just mentioned. It's a good one-stop shop. You'll get the information you need. It'll lead you to other places for information if you need that. And you can contact me on there if you want to talk, if you have any questions. I talk to just as many wives and girlfriends of addicts as I do addicts themselves. Because sometimes, the addict is the last one to know it. Like I mentioned, it took a good 4 or 5 months for me to accept the fact that I was a porn addict after I was arrested. So, it's sometimes the one who's the problem is the last to know. To stop by recoveringpornaddict.com. I think you'll find something of use there, even if it's just educational.
And Joshua, you are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us a truth to remember you by.
Truth to remember me by. Wow. That's like asking me to write something in my yearbook. I will go with my favorite quote of all time. And while he was kind of a bastard, Nietzsche was really good at giving quotes. And my favorite quote of his is, "That which is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil." That just sums it up for me.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, don't learn about him. He was a horrible person. But he strung a few nouns and verbs together, and I just love that saying. That which takes place out of love is beyond good and evil.
Well, Joshua, I really appreciate you sharing your story and coming on our show today.
Well, this was great, and I appreciate you giving me the time. Hopefully, we helped a few more people out there, and people will learn we need to talk about this. This is going to be an epidemic if we don't talk about it. Now is the time to be proactive.
Wow, you're right, too. You have to come back one day.
I'd be happy to. Looking forward to it already.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye now.
Bye-bye.